All right. Well, I wondered if you all were going to come back, but I don't know why I did. Every time I walk in here in June, it's like, oh my gosh, where'd all these people come from? So we've got a great season for you all this year and a great program to kick it off with tonight, which is our 69th season of the Rejebian book review series, which is kind of amazing. So I was thinking about this today. So the book review series is 69 years old. So am I, which I'm sad to say. But as I was thinking about it, I found something I wanted to show you all. Jackson, will you put that up there? So I have been involved with this for 30 years, since 1995. But as I realized, I've probably been involved a little longer. I feel like this was right before my grandmother was going in to decide what book she was going to review for the 1956 summer, and I was advising her on that. And you can clearly see if you look close, I wasn't that happy with her selection. But in the end, it all worked out, right? So we're glad you're here. I'm going to turn this over to Carrie Cannon from the church, and then Susan Wilson, and then our speaker, Patrick Jenevein, and I'll see you after the show.
Thanks, David. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carrie Cannon. I am the director of music here at Highland Park. There's a choir member. Did you hear that? There's a choir member right there. Hey, raise your hand. I'm just curious, how many of you are actually members of Highland Park UMC? Okay, that's not too bad tonight, you know? All right, now raise your hand if you are not. Look at that. The more I've learned about this, talking to Richard, I'm so impressed with this program. Obviously, many years in the making, such a history, such a legacy. I love that the lion's share of you guys are not members here, and yet you're here in our building. I love using God's house for an opportunity to bring people together, to talk about things that you might otherwise not talk about with folks you otherwise may not know. And that is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So on behalf of the church, welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you're looking for a choir, let me know. I'll be happy to have you. But to get us started, let's bow in a word of prayer. I'm going to let you find your seat. Take your time. Nobody is watching you right now. Nobody. You're just fine. You're just fine. Let's bow in a word of prayer, and we'll get started. Gracious God, it is true. We are just so grateful for the opportunity to come here safely into your space, into your house, to share a meal for some of us, to come together and unpack these books, the gift that these authors have given us to trigger and start and initiate conversations that we otherwise might not have, and to sit in a space to share in dialogue and to come together from all walks of life, different beliefs, different religions, different backgrounds, and to share together in a loving, kind way. An example of how our community, our state, our nation, and our world should take watch and learn. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to be that exemplar for that tonight. Be with our conversation, be with our fellowship, keep us safe, and bring us back. We pray this in your son's holy name. Amen. Good to meet you guys. Thank you, Susan. Come on.
Good evening. I'm Susan Wilson, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Patrick Jenevein. Patrick was raised in Dallas, graduated from St. Mark's School and Davidson College. He is the CEO of Pointe Bello, a Dallas-based strategy development firm that provides guidance to governmental and commercial interests on doing business in the People's Republic of China. He is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, a leading foreign policy organization. For over 20 years, Tang Energy Group, a company he co-founded, developed several businesses in the power generating and electrical infrastructure sectors, which included wind farms and manufacture of wind turbine blades. He is past chairman of both the Dallas Committee on Foreign Relations and the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Dallas. While he was traveling extensively and leading the growth of these businesses, his wife, Kathy, kept the home fires burning. She raised 3 daughters, all attended Highland Park schools and were La Fiesta Duchesses. Kathy served the Highland Park community as PTA president and member of the HP Education Foundation. She and Patrick are active parishioners at St. Michael's and All Angels Episcopal Church. Kathy is with us tonight. Kathy and Patrick, who live 1 mile from here, want you to know that the strength of community cohesion that congregations and parishes bring their members and our city support people like Patrick, who work thousands of miles away from home. Interviewing Patrick tonight is Richard Stanford, a member of the Rejebian Committee and a retired member of the staff here at HPUMC. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Jenevein.
Thank you, Susan. Before you get going, can I say thank you?
Please.
Thank you all for being here. I know you're giving me time that you won't get back tonight. And thank you to Highland Park United Methodist Church. You have brought parishes and congregations together that really do make our own parish a better, stronger parish. And it's our parish that allowed me to actually go out into the world, as we're often called to do. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. And this is such a timely topic. You know, this morning the president says we have a deal with China. You may have an opinion about that, but he says we have a deal with China over rare earth, over Chinese students remaining in this country, over the amount of tariffs on both sides. We'll see. But supposedly that's been done in London. Last week, the Secretary of Defense said, very dangerous in the straits around Taiwan, very dangerous. So, I mean, China should be on our minds, the 2 great superpowers, and who better? Your book, Dancing with the Dragon, says cautionary tales of the new China from an old China hand. Why don't you start us off by telling us your history in China, dealing over 30 years?
My first trip to China was in 1995. Do you hear an echo?
And I think we're okay.
Yeah. Okay. My first trip to China was in 1995. We had a business in Texas, natural gas processing company, or NG processing company. The China National Petroleum Corporation was flaring an awful lot of gas. We had the chance to go to China, put a little pressure on some of that gas or cool it, and then if you do that, then you can move it around as a liquid. And moving wasted natural gas and converting it into liquid allowed people in China to replace dung for their cooking fuel with natural gas, which is a lot cleaner. It also cleaned the atmosphere. As soon as we had the chance to, well, actually, let me stop just a minute because Susan was asking me earlier. On one of our very first pilot projects, and we can go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, that's our very first pilot project. That's King Collier, who laid some of the finest welds you'd ever see. But a pilot project, we were trying to see if we could get equipment and men into China, and if we could get men and money out of China, and we showed that we could. But we were trying to figure out who our counterparty was. And the Chinese told us our counterparty is XYZ company. We couldn't confirm that. There's not a Dun & Bradstreet in China, so we got a hold of the CIA. And some young officer at the CIA said, yes, your counterparty is XYZ. So I merrily get back on the plane and go halfway around the northern hemisphere to Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of the far western province in China, and found out that the CIA was wrong. So I came back, and being a 30-year-old obstinate male at the time, or 30-something, called the CIA back and said, "You didn't quite tell me the truth." I may have been a little rougher than that. So this guy said, "Well, what else do you know?" Well, that started a relationship that endures today. In fact, yesterday afternoon, I was telling Susan I got an email or a text, a signal text, if you've been following Hexa. And this guy said, "You know, the reports that we did at Pointe Bello just 5 years ago are now hitting the public space. So now we're actually being heard." So 5 years ago, we were saying, you need to worry. Huawei, the Chinese telecom maker, is dangerous. What they're doing is much more insidious than what they say. You look like you're about to ask a question.
Well, they say it's pretty insidious, so if it's much more insidious, my goodness. Well,
Do you want me to scare everybody?
yeah. But you ended up in litigation.
Oh, yeah. So we ended with the CIA saying, "What else do you know?" So along the way, we developed a gas-fired power plant at the western end of the Great Wall. And one of the ways you you generate electricity with natural gas is you take a GE jet engine, a big one, like you'd put on a 747, and you put it on the ground, bolt it down real tight, put a generator behind it, so that when the jet engine turns real fast, it turns the generator real fast, and you get a lot of electricity. But as soon as you bring a jet engine into China, you're working with AVIC, the Aviation Industry Corporation of China. By 2023 revenue, it was the biggest defense contractor in the world. We got along with them really, really well. Under Deng Xiaoping's regime, China was a great place to work. When Xi Jinping rose to power, we'd already started with AVIC, a company to make blades for wind turbines, and that was worth $1.8 billion. We were going to have a public offering in China. We started a company in Texas, right here in Dallas, called Soaring Wind Energy, to build wind farms. And the point of that company was to build a wind farm that used HT blades from China. So the synchronicity was working really, really well. AVIC, the big defense contractor, said they wanted to join our company in Texas. We said, you can't take advantage of the tax credits. You can't keep up with the commercial cycles, the speed of commercial cycles in the United States, and you sure don't understand ownership. You know, how can somebody own the wind over their ranch? Well, that's kind of hard for us to understand, but if you're a communist and you grow up in a communist system, no way you can understand that. Well, they said, well, we'd like to invest $600 million. I said, okay, but we're going to have dispute resolution if there's ever any dispute in Dallas, Texas. And that passed, it went through, and I thought, hey, we're not going to have a dispute because there's no way they want to have a dispute resolution in front of y'all. Y'all would have been the jury. Y'all would have said, maybe I like or don't like this Jenevein character, but I understand how he talks. I understand what he's talking about. And it's a lot harder for them to send somebody from Beijing that can communicate with you all as well as I do, as poorly as I do. I'm still better than somebody from Beijing. Anyway, they stole a wind farm from us. They hired our general manager. They diverted financing. There are a few other things, but we sued them, the biggest defense contractor in the world in Dallas, Texas. The biggest defense contractor in the world is also the sole supplier of military aircraft to the People's Liberation Army. So as the suit is going on, the U.S. Air Force calls us and says, what else do you know? Jackson, can you flip to that chart, the flat line chart? Because in our litigation, one of the things we did is we flatlined sorry about the complexity in the chart, but there are three important pieces of that. One, the flat line. We flatlined AVIC, the biggest defense contractor in the world's strategic acquisition of aviation assets in the United States. That's a big national security interest, and the U.S. Air Force cared about that. They cared a lot about that. The blue line shows that they kept buying strategic assets around the world. And the gold bar at the end is we collected dollars in Dallas in April 2022. Pat Walsh, who's here in Dallas and a former commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, said we were getting a glass of water together yesterday afternoon. He said, "You're the only one that's beaten the communists," which is, from him, that's quite a compliment. But anyway, that shows how you can tie national security interests to commercial interests, and that's what the U.S. Air Force was interested in.
Okay. It was an interesting journey if you've read the book. Incidentally, if you haven't read the book, they're going to be available upstairs. Patrick's going to sign them too. So after this, if this tweaks your interest, get the book. But you've written a book. You're a businessman. You wrote a book. And so obviously you mean to help us understand something. So to cut to the chase before we get more detail, why'd you write it? What do you really want us to know?
Susan mentioned I'm an Episcopalian, and there's, in our prayers of the people, we've got we cycle through different prayers of the people. But at one time, or in one of the cycles, we pray for the victims of hunger, fear, injustice, and oppression. And when I was hearing that prayer, saying it with my parishioners, I felt a stabbing in my sternum. And a bunch of my friends, who some of them are quite clear what they think I should do, told me, "You need to write a book." And they kept saying that. I said, "Okay, I'll write a book." And so the dedication of that book is to the victims of fear, injustice, and oppression. The people in China, y'all ought to know about the Uyghurs, especially in far western China, in Xinjiang. What the Communist Party is doing to those people is, well, the first Trump administration described it as genocide. The Biden administration described it as genocide. They're torturing people, they're sterilizing Uyghurs, and they are changing the way Uyghurs think. They're not just changing what kind of information they get, they do that too, but they're changing how Uyghurs, and they're trying to do it to us too, through TikTok and other forms like that. They're trying to change the way we think about the information we perceive. They call it cognitive warfare. They're investing perhaps trillions of dollars over a 5 to 10 year period to try to change the way we process thought.
We may want to talk more about that. That's wow. But maybe before we do that, a lot of us remember Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Deng Xiaoping, I get that right, and of course Xi now.
Yeah, Mao Zedong, then Deng Xiaoping, and then Xi Jinping. And there were a few leaders in between, but those are the important three to think about. And just think of the barrel of a gun, because that was Mao's phrase. Mao said the party, meaning the Communist Party of China, needs to hold the barrel of the gun. And Mao and others created the Communist Party in, I think it was July 2023. So the Communist Party comes first in a timeline. And sorry, I'm getting a little background on the Communist Party first, then I'll get back to the three leaders. And then the Communist Party formed the People's Liberation Army about 1927, I think August 1st, 1927. And then not until October 1st, 1949, did they form the People's Republic of China. And as the People's Republic of China was formed, the Communist Party gave the People's Republic of China a constitution, and they present it as if it were Moses delivering the commandments. That's how they present it. So the party always comes first. The military is the People's Liberation Army is the armed wing of the Communist Party. The PLA does not pledge allegiance to China. So technically, China does not have a military. It's the People's Republic of China does not have a military. The Communist Party does. So imagine if the Republican Party and the Democratic Party had their own military and there was no U.S. military. Okay, so that's part of the background. Now Mao comes along and he's the creator of the party, the PLA, and the PRC. By the way, the book came out on the 75th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Not by accident.
I was going to say, okay.
So Mao says the legitimacy of the party comes from the barrel of a gun. And that's it. He didn't care what anybody said. If they didn't like it, they killed him. Then Deng Xiaoping came along, the bridge player, the short Chinese leader that came to Houston, bought a cowboy, or we gave him a cowboy hat. He said, you know what, let's holster the pistol, let's holster the gun, and tie legitimacy of the Communist Party to the welfare of Chinese people. What a radical idea. Now, Xi Jinping has come along and said, the heck with the people's prosperity or their quality of life, I'm using the gun. So it's gone back from Mao saying the barrel of a gun to Deng saying, put the gun in the holster, improve people's lives, to back to the barrel of a gun.
And do you have any feeling for why that happened? I mean, you would think Deng Xiaoping were putting him on a road to really being commercially open to the world, and it changes. Is it the personality of Xi? What is it?
That gets into psychology, which I really can't get to, but I did ask, the People's Republic of China has a military attaché to the United States, and he came to Dallas February last year, and they wanted me to have a lunch for him, which made me a wee bit nervous. I did it anyway. We had a small group, just 12, who was the Major General Liu and 2 of his colonels, and I made sure that every other Texan that was there was tall or beautiful.
Yeah.
So if y'all know Kathleen Gibson, I sat her right next to Major General Liu. Anyway, I asked him, I took a long time to ask it because you can't just ask a question directly, you have to come around it. But essentially I said, General Liu, Americans ask me what I think about Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping, because they say both have shown an ability to act with consummate brutality, just ugly, ugly brutality. But, and I blamed it on y'all. I said, y'all asked me, is Xi Jinping very smart? I said, Deng could act with brilliance, and Xi Jinping hasn't shown any of that, any similar brilliance. So, here I am whacking the leader of the Communist Party to a major general of the PLA who's sworn allegiance to Xi Jinping's leadership, and he immediately said, Xi Jinping talks to the Deng faction. So understanding the factionality is really difficult for Americans, but this guy was a high-level leader, but not at the top. So he could see up and he could see side to side, and he was aware of factions within the party. So Xi Jinping is scared of something. That's all I can figure.
Well, the Chinese economy hadn't gone that well recently.
It's been horrible. And that's something we need to take advantage of. I think America is a force for good. I think the Communist Party is a force for evil. And when that force for evil has an economic problem, I think we need to press. They need cash. So if we want to direct how they behave, if we attenuate their access to cash, we can change their behavior.
And I was going to ask this later, but there are certain threats from them. We owe them a lot of money.
We do owe them a lot of money. But what are they going to do? Call the debt?
That's kind of behind my question. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting. To be fair, years ago, I can't remember when, a bunch of Chinese had come over to visit us, and on the way over, they'd had a bunch of headwinds, so they had to land in Alaska to refuel. And they got to Dallas finally, and they said it was great to see Alaska, territory that they might foreclose on. I told them good luck.
Yeah. Okay, I dwell on how much we owe China a lot, and so.
Well, we have a problem with debt. There's no doubt about that. And our debt problem severely constricts our maneuverability or the options we have and how we act strategically in the world. So I don't mean to diminish the importance of the debt or the limitations debt places on us, but what the Communist Party can do about it is that they've got bigger problems to deal with than being able to sell our debt. If they start selling treasuries, the value of the treasuries goes down, and they've got $2 trillion worth of U.S. treasuries, something on that magnitude.
Wow, $2 trillion.
Yeah.
Wow. Another threat's Taiwan. You know, as I said, the Secretary of Defense was talking last week about extreme danger in the Taiwan area. What do you feel about it? Do you have any way of measuring how dangerous it is right now?
Yeah, we can measure it by the military activity in the South China Sea, not just around Taiwan, but in the whole South China Sea, around Taiwan, near the Philippines, on the reefs that China has dredged to destroy reefs and turn them into military bases. So we can measure, we're observing it, and a guy that I work with who's got somewhat of a spooky background actually went to the Philippines and said to Filipino fishermen, do you need a freezer on your boat? Would that make more money for you if you had a freezer on your boat? I said, yeah, we could catch more fish and freeze them and stay out longer and then come home. So, well, I'll give you a freezer. So, well, a freezer doesn't do any good unless you have a generator. So, well, I'll give you a generator too. And what was the price for that? Put a Starlink satellite receiver on the mast of the boat and put all these sensors on it. So they've got, we now have pictures of what the Communist Party has been doing to fishermen in the Philippines.
It is fascinating. Now we hear, I hear stuff like TikTok and the controversy over that sort of thing. What about TikTok?
Can I go back to Taiwan just for a moment?
Yeah, go back to Taiwan.
Okay. So you're asking about a deal. Is there a deal to be made over Taiwan and the South China Sea?
Right.
We think in terms of deals. Americans, can we reach an agreement? Because we expect the laws in our land to enforce agreements. Chinese don't have that. Xi Jinping is not looking for a deal. He is simply looking for power to keep him in power. And so every interaction he has with the President of the United States or with congressmen from the United States, he's trying to ratchet up the power that he can extract or the appearance of power that he can extract from those meetings. He doesn't care about a deal. He needs power or else he gets his throat slit tonight. So that's what he's worried about. He looks at a deal as just a skirmish in a broader battle, in a broader war. And as far as power goes, he wonders why the heck hadn't the President of the United States, whether it's Biden or Trump or any other, why the heck hasn't the President of the United States kicked Putin's teeth in? Why? Because there are two things about Chinese that you really need to think about if you're dealing with. One is face, concept of face. The second is network. We've got a network. We've met each other. We live in Dallas. We each have overlapping groups of people even here tonight. So our networks are different, but they're close. Xi Jinping expects his network to fight the President of the United States network. And one of the people in Xi Jinping's network is Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir has made himself vulnerable and weak, low-hanging fruit to knock his head off. And knock his head off is not an exaggeration. To that point, Li Keqiang was the number 2 guy under Xi Jinping for 10 years. The first year he was out, within months, healthy guy, 69 or so, died of a heart attack. He was in Shanghai. He went to a middle grade hospital. There are 3 grades of hospital. The one for the PLA and the Communist Party, that's number 1. Then there's one for rich people. And then there's everybody else. And you don't want the everybody else. You want the tier 1. So Li Keqiang shows up at this middle tier hospital where he shouldn't have been. And they say, oh, he died of a heart attack. Chinese that I talked to say Xi Jinping had him killed just to show that he could.
Right.
So Xi Jinping, back to Vladimir Putin, wonders, here, the President of the United States is in a position to make sure Vladimir Putin goes away. And if we're not doing that, he sees that as weakness. That's the kind of deal that Xi Jinping looks for is, who'd you kill yesterday? Who are you going to kill tomorrow? How does that reflect the power that you have to do what you want? Okay, so that's Taiwan. We're going to go into TikTok.
But you mentioned face. I mean, some of this is just so different to a Western mind. It's important to understand what all this means.
It's really hard to understand. It's like machismo in some way. What it's like honor to some extent. But if you don't have a set of laws that will protect an agreement that we may have reached, if you don't have confidence in a set of laws that will protect agreements among people, you have to look for something else. And they don't have laws that protect people. The Communist Party imposes law as a tool to rule people. It's a tool to control people. The laws don't apply to the Communist Party, and the Communist Party can change the laws at any time they want. So you can't depend on the laws. So you wind up creating these other constructs that are, call them artificial if you want, but they're not as strong as the rule of law. And so it's a sorry substitute for law.
So how do you make a deal in China?
You show them that you've got something that they need, and you work really hard to make sure you keep having something to offer them. Jackson, will you go to the camel picture real quick? This is a story on face. Okay, the guy on the biggest camel, the lead camel, is a younger me. The guy in the middle was Deng Xiaoping's advisor on jet engines and rockets. So there are already a few things wrong with this picture. First, in the Confucian hierarchy, there's always a superior and a subordinate. There's never a peer to peer. The closest thing to a peer to peer is an older sister to a younger brother in Confucian, hierarchies. So here, Mr. Joe, the guy in the middle camel, is older than I am. Oh, and Chinese is always superior to everything else. So I'm not Chinese. So I'm younger. I'm not Chinese, so he's already superior in 2 ways. He's a government official, which makes him superior a 3rd way, because I'm not a government official that he knows about anyway. And I've ridden horse. I grew up in Texas, and I've ridden horses, so I can actually ride a camel from, sitting to lurching to standing. And I made a mistake of being comfortable in the saddle and looking back and seeing Mr. Joe as this camel is lurching up. He is white knuckling the pommel, and his face shows fear. And I saw it. You see the shadows? So did other people see it. They gave me this picture. So I have messed up on face already. I'm just torched. Jackson, can you flip to the next one, or can I? There. So that evening, and it's cold as all get out in Dunhuang, China, he gets back at me. What you don't see in the picture is him on the other side grinning because he's kicking my fanny around the pool table. I'm not trying to lose. I'm trying to beat him, and it's clear that I'm trying to beat him. And he's on the other side of the table grinning, and so is a wall full of his lieutenants. So all these people are watching him kick my fanny around the pool table, and that gives them face. So that restores the equilibrium of face. And then, oops, wrong way. So that we get to toast after that. And that's where we built the gas-fired power plant at the western end of the Great Wall.
So I would hope people who deal in business in China and our government officials understand face, because boy, if you don't, that sounds like you've messed up.
I got a call just a few weeks ago, the day before. There was a team that was on its way to Switzerland for a negotiation with a Chinese outfit. And they said, what can you tell us? I said, well, a lot, but you're leaving tomorrow.
Yeah. And that reminds me, Pointe Bello, you counsel people dealing with China now. Tell us more about what you do.
I'm not a very good consultant. I say, this is what you should do, and if you don't want to do it, okay. So what we do is we design plans that actually say, if you want to attenuate Communist Party access to capital, if you want to attack their appearance of legitimacy, this is what you need to do. And so we say, here's the battle plan in a way. It's a battle plan, except that it's non-kinetic. It's all in the capital area and the narrative area. Okay. So a lot of people in Washington talk about, or the Department of Defense talk about A2AD, anti-access area denial. So that's how you keep a foreign adversary out of a given area. I say, you need to think about A2CD, anti-access capital denial. So when I'm talking to people in the Pentagon, they say, capital, you mean like capital ships? I say, no, I'm talking about cash in your wallet and securities in your 401k. Then they get it.
Okay, really. Well, let's go back to TikTok.
TikTok.
Yes.
The Communist Party think it's quaint how we Americans think ownership confers or conveys control. The Communist Party thinks control confers control. And so if they have you by the throat, it doesn't matter what you own, you're going to do what they want. So TikTok is up to no good. We mentioned cognitive warfare a little bit. So the Communist Party has a cognitive warfare plan, and it's really hard to get to a lot of it. They've employed a bunch of neuroscientists to actually try to change how we think, not just what we think about. Our newsreels will show, this is the news that's important to think about today. So we're told what to think about. We may say, hey, you left out this, that, or another. But the Communist Party is trying to go another step further, a big leap further. So it doesn't matter what news comes to you. They want to be able to control how you think about it. They want to set the wiring in your brain to think the way they want you to think. So you can talk to some people from China about the Uyghurs, and they'll say, The Uyghurs need to be in jail.
Right.
They really will. So that's part of cognitive warfare. TikTok is a vector to deliver those manipulations. So one of the things our company's tried to find out, and it's been really difficult, is how much is China spending on the cognitive warfare. And it looks like it's on the magnitude of $2 trillion. And it's unclear if that was just in this past 5-year plan or the past 2 5-year plans. So it's either $2 trillion over 5 years or 10 years. And what else they may hang on that is something else. So if we force the sale of TikTok, all we're doing is forcing a new set of investors to give an old set of investors money.
Okay. Well, there's been so much controversy over TikTok back and forth in Washington, and I never know where it stands at any particular moment. But, well, how about, just to get down to some really interesting little stuff, how about all those balloons that float over?
Jackson, can you show the balloon picture?
Oh, you've got a balloon picture?
Yeah, so I think it was 2018, it may have been 19. We wrote a report for the U.S. Air Force. And it said, there it is. That's out of our report to the U.S. Air Force. It looks a lot like the balloon we shot down year before last, whenever we shot it down. Anyway, our report said the PLA sent a scholar over. I say he was sent on a PLA scholarship. People don't always like it when I talk that way. But anyway, this guy came over. He went to Duke. Duke was working on radar absorbent fabrics. And our report said the PLA is putting radar absorbent technologies into high altitude ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance balloons. And then sure enough, we actually have to shoot one down that's on its way all the way across the United States. Now, one thing that's really interesting to me about that, here, this balloon is at 65,000 feet, and we don't have a warplane that flies that high. The U-2 will fly that high, but it's a reconnaissance plane. Nothing that has a gun on it can fly that high. So the U.S. Air Force pilot that actually shot it down didn't have a radar signature to lock onto, didn't have a heat signature to lock onto. He had nothing. He had a visual line of sight, and he used an old Sidewinder type missile, and he guessed and pulled the trigger and nailed it with the first shot. So, good pilot.
Good for the Air Force. Yeah, that's fabulous. Now, another piece that's always fascinating that we don't really know about, we read about in the news, but is Belt and Road and all the attempts to influence the world. How's Belt and, you might explain what that is to everybody, and how well is it going or not well?
Oh, I'm glad you called it Belt and Road. The Chinese is Yidaoyiku, so one belt, one road. The Chinese translation or propagandized translation for all of us is Belt and Road Initiative. How sweet. It's nothing sweet about it. It's the one belt, one road, aggressively offensive strategy to bring countries from around the world under the Chinese umbrella. They have spent $5 trillion investing in projects around the world. Some of it, there's straight equity investment, but not much. Most of it's debt. Most of it's by loans that are secured or collateralized by either products like oil. Venezuela owes China millions of tons of oil every year at, it's priced at a low price just for assistance they've given them. They took over a port in Sri Lanka that they had, they told the Sri Lankans, you build this port and we'll send a bunch of ships over and you'll be able to refuel and you'll make money. So the Sri Lankans built the port and the Chinese ships never came. So Sri Lanka couldn't pay the debt. So China said, okay, well, we'll just take the port. And then all of a sudden, Chinese ships started showing up.
to their port. Okay.
So One Belt, One Road is a strategic offensive. They just built a port in Peru at Shanghai. Xi Jinping went and opened it up. So these ports and roads and telecommunication networks and power plants are all over the world. And they're creating obligations from other countries to China. So this is a reverse of the debt that you were worried about or asked about earlier. Our debt to them, that's okay. The Chinese are foreclosing on assets around the world. But that's one of the things we're working on too. How do you impair the value of $5 trillion? If you can impair that just 10%, that's the same as 10 Ford-class aircraft carriers for their life. That's a big, and I have to talk about that in those terms when I talk to the Pentagon, because they don't really care about money, but they care about ships. They care about aircraft carriers.
Right. Well, so this is an exercise in understanding so we can get someplace. I hate to leave people thinking that there's no hope. How can we deal with China that is the world's two superpowers now? How do you deal with China in a way that's constructive, avoids war? The big question: avoids war, can be helpful to the world.
Well, Richard, what I'm working to do now more than anything else is to avoid war. Everything I do is trying to avoid war. We need to elbow for time and space to avoid war over Taiwan. But I am very hopeful in the long run. The very first thing we need to do is get our own financial house in order. If we don't do that, we don't have a leg to stand on. But if we do that, and Americans will do that, I have faith that Americans will do that. If we do that, then long term, we have a system that pushes authority and responsibility to individuals. And when we push responsibility and authority for decisions to individuals, people realize their own self-actualization. They do better, they do good things. And that makes our country stronger. Xi Jinping, especially, Deng Xiaoping realized that to a little bit. Xi Jinping says, we don't care what any of y'all think or can do. All we care about is what your life can do to promote the Communist Party. That's no way to bet on the long run. So we are betting on the long run. Here, this little revolutionary bunch of 13 colonists said, we're going to kick out the biggest imperial power, the strongest imperial power that ever walked the earth. And we did it. And we raised the standard of living of people. We gave people freedom. We protected their liberties. China's not doing that, and they can't. So the long run, I'm very optimistic. In the short run, we need to get our act together because Xi Jinping could go crazy tonight.
Okay. I think I want to leave 10 minutes or so for questions. So if you can just turn up the lights, Jackson, we've got 13 minutes. Okay, looks like we've got a question already. Yes. Okay.
Getting our act together is getting our financial house in order. We need to make sure that we are not borrowing as much money as a nation that we are. And there's a lot that goes along with that, but fundamentally, it's the raw power of the American economic dream. It's really powerful. Nobody else ever in the history of the world has been able to raise the standard of living for people as the United States has. We need to get back to that. And that leads to some uncomfortable decisions for a lot of politicians and businesses, even like ours, that bet on, when we were developing wind farms, that bet on government subsidies. Now I look about that, and the biggest mistakes I made in my career was betting on government subsidies.
So I have a question. If Trump just did the rare earth minerals?
Yes.
For exchange for their students to stay here, all that says to me is more spies. They're just spies. That's how
what?
Spies. They're just going to be spies, like planted. I mean, that's how I feel about it, that they have they've been allowed to come into this country. They've stolen all of our software stuff. I mean, I don't know how to speak the language that you do, but to me, it sounds like it's not working that way. I wouldn't let them come in. I mean, that may be harsh, but that's kind of how I feel.
Well, we could compete for harshness. A few things about that. The U.S. Department of Justice says that China steals $200 to $600 billion every year of intellectual property from American institutions. A guy that retired from the CIA and has written a paper that says really, because those are all espionage acts, and because he knows the percentage of successful espionage operations, he says the real number is more like $5 trillion every year. And the guy's name is Glenn Chaffetz. You can look it up. And I can use his name because Putin outed him. He was the CIA station chief in Helsinki. And Putin named him, and he had to leave. Anyway, he's the guy that writes that about $5 trillion. So you're right that there can be a lot of espionage going on. What you left out is that it can be sabotage as well. And sabotage is huge. But where I would say bring more nuance to it, there are many Chinese that do not like what the Communist Party is doing, even though Communist Party driven laws require Chinese to support MSS, the Ministry of State Securities. So if there's CIA, FBI rolled into one, comes and knocks on your door and you're Chinese and says, you're Chinese, you need to tell us everything you know about this. And I've got stories that would make your skin on your neck crawl about that too. But there is a difference. And to the extent that we can reward the ones that would take down the Communist Party, but they're hard to find.
Go on.
I'm concerned because I studied Mao in Red Star Over China, the book, and I don't see that there's much difference in Mao's time to Xi's time. And I saw that 4 young Chinese were arrested in the last year, trying to contaminate all of our food sources and water sources, that is their ultimate goal is to destroy us in that way. And I'm also concerned about just the Chinese. Many Chinese have taken land around military bases in the United States. And so these are things that I am very concerned about because I feel that things haven't changed that much from Red Star Over China till now.
Jackson, can you flip to the map slide? I agree with you. So not only can they, this evening, the Communist Party has the ability to shut off the electricity to a third of Americans tonight. Tomorrow, they could infect a half a dozen to a dozen different municipal water supplies. And because of the dysentery that would cause, America, the United States, would run out of IV bags within a week. Maybe it's 10 days, but it's a very short time. This is a map of Valverde, Texas, Valverde County, Texas. Laughlin Air Force Base is down at the bottom. Well, it's at the bottom right. Anyway, a Chinese company bought 200 square miles of Texas ranch land, and it passed CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, a congressional level, or actually it's a Treasury-chaired committee that's supposed to prevent things like that. So when I testified to the Texas legislature, I said, yeah, you may look at the map and see what it's close to, but if you're on those 200 square miles and you look up, you're looking into Laughlin Air Force Base airspace, where we practice refueling every bird of war that we have. So those kinds of things are dangerous. But Texans in 10 weeks passed a law that, the Chinese owner of the land wanted to electrify the land, and they said they're going to build a wind farm. It's not even windy in Valverde County, Texas. I made that point to the legislatures too. But if you say you've got a permit for wind farms, then you can run electricity to whatever sensors you want. So you're right to be afraid, but in 10 weeks, Texas did something different. And they said, we're not going to allow North Korean companies, Chinese companies, Russian companies, or Iranian companies to connect to the Texas grid. So while there's a lot to be fearful of, there's a lot of hope too. And then, do they want to destroy us? Not really. Just existentially, our view of going after imperialists like the British Empire scares the dickens out of imperialists anywhere, because their imperialistic system, the communist is just an imperialistic system, another imperialistic system, fears the radical approach that countries and communities like ours have that start with we the people under God. You can take that further with our Judeo-Christian heritage. God made man in God's image. Jesus comes along and says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God's what is God's. Whether you're religious or not, that background plays out. When a pilot in the United States declares an emergency, air traffic control says, the first thing they say, anybody know what they say? How many souls on board? Exactly. So here, even our government, when we're in an emergency, asks a pilot, how many souls on board? We care about people. The Communist Party does not.
I have a question regarding the military. You talked about Taiwan and the South China Sea, and China is way outpacing us in terms of developing ships, aircraft, et cetera. They spend the money probably a bit more efficiently than our Defense Department does. Can you give any view as far as the qualitative difference? Because they're untested, and you often hear that a lot of their service people are there just to give them jobs. So can you have a little bit of an insight as to what happens if the balloon goes up?
We can probably talk a day about that. So quality, let's start with quality. We understand our quality, so we've done shipbuilding reports for the government. So we kind of know a lot about the quality of shipbuilding. And if you have a submarine that's going all over the globe, the temperature of the water changes, the salinity of the water changes. If you have an aircraft carrier that's doing that, all that happens. And the longer the ship, the more torsion the ship has to deal with. So those are all issues that Americans address very well. It's not clear that the PLA Navy or PLAN addresses shipbuilding with the same level of care. So their ships are likely to last a shorter period of time than ours. That doesn't do you a whole lot of good if they've got a Navy that's bigger than ours and a lot younger, because if their ships have a 20-year life rather than a 50-year life, they can still put a bunch of American boys and girls that we send into harm's way on the bottom of the ocean. So while there's some reason to be hopeful, there's also a real reason to be seriously concerned. They've also developed the Communist, or the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has also spent a lot of money on developing hypersonic weapons and weapons specifically designed to sink aircraft carriers. Okay, that's kind of the bad news. Now, a little bit of good news, because I am optimistic. The Communist Party, or the PLA, does war games like the Department of Defense. And while we don't see all of them, we've done enough research to see evidence of the war games that they do play. And it shows that, or one set of scenarios shows that the PLA would lose hundreds of thousands of troops if they try to attack Taiwan. Almost all those troops are male, and almost every one of those sons is the only son of two parents and the only grandson of four grandparents. That's a problem for Xi Jinping. If he gets a lot of boys killed, that's a problem for him waking up without a slit throat. Point of reference, to go back, I can't remember the year when China fought Vietnam, but in 6 weeks, China lost 58,000 troops. That still scares Xi Jinping. You know, we lost 58,000 troops or so in over years in Vietnam, but they lost 58,000 troops in 6 weeks.
Capital denial. What would it do to the Chinese economy if military retirement plans and, back here, Richard.
Where are you?
Oh, back there. All right.
back there,
Okay.
okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Military retirement plans and government retirement plans were prohibited from investing in Chinese equities, and why don't we do it?
Well, we've written a paper about that too. And we didn't get a good answer. We wrote a paper about how the PLA Navy financed building the Liaoning, their first aircraft carrier. They issued a $1 billion bond by a company, I can't remember the name right now, but it's based in the Bahamas or it's based offshore. And it was formed as a company with one share worth $1, yet it raised $1 billion to go to the company in China that builds ships. And it had a guarantee from the China Post Office that the China Post Office would guarantee the bond. And people bought it. You know, probably 60 to 70% of the bond was bought by American investors. So that's one of the things that we're after. We're looking for answers for that kind of question exactly.
Okay.
This is going to be our last question.
Yeah, it's 7:59. So
7:59, 8 o'clock. One more.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take this. Okay.
There seems to be a couple of daggers that I'm not sure how the Chinese are going to get around. One of them is demographics, which you kind of touched on, that they're saying that by the end of this decade, that there will be half as many Chinese as there are today because their demographics are terrible. And then the other one is that it appears that they have between 60 and 80 million homes that will never be lived in. And all of those are purchased. And even the ones, and those are the ones that are built. There may be a few million more that they've paid for that never even gotten started. How do you deal with two almost intractable issues like that?
They're daggers pointed at Xi Jinping's heart. Demographically, though, he doesn't care. Chinese historians talk about over a dozen times in China's history, wars and the pestilence and famine that go along with that have more than halved the Chinese population. So a Chinese ruler really doesn't care. Now that's short-sighted because the number of people you have working affects your ability to build ships and weapons and all kinds of other things. The real estate problem actually gives Donald Trump a wonderful opportunity. President Trump should go to General Secretary Xi Jinping, and don't ever call Xi Jinping a president. He's the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He's the chairman of the Central Military Commission. He is not a president. Anyway, President Trump could go to General Secretary Xi Jinping and say, "Xi, I need your help." You know, that's hard for Trump to say anyway. But anyway, I need your help because I'm about to kick Putin's teeth in. And when I do, Russia's gonna implode. And I need your help to help keep Russia's eastern borders secure. I'll work with those little pipsqueaks at NATO and we'll keep the western borders safe. but I need you to help me, Xi Jinping. And if you do that, I'll be your personal advisor on real estate.
Thank Patrick Jenevein for a great presentation. We're gonna go ahead and go up to the signing table because the books are up there, and Patrick needs to be there. So
Patrick, thank you very much.
Yes.
Next week, we have one of our longtime favorites, Nancy Ashley, with the memoir of Paul Newman. So everybody remember the directions, and we'll see you next Wednesday.